Hi, I'm John Galloway. I work for Microsoft. I've been there almost 7 years. They haven't fired me yet. And before that, I worked in industry, did a lot of web dev and small startup kinds of things, consulting. I did web dev for bigger financial companies, and so I've been working since classic ASP all the way through earlier versions of web forms, et cetera. So telling you that partly because it'll explain some of my thoughts on coming into, come on now. This is going to take some of the fun out. On coming into Razor Pages, because I've already learned MVC. I started working with MVC earlier on. I actually had to learn, I knew web forms pretty well, and then I had to learn MVC. And after a while, I learned it okay enough that I wrote a book, and then I wrote another book, and another book, and another book, and another book. I've never read this one yet in Chinese. Someone might, but it's cool. And then actually, I wrote this MVC music store. So I say this just to say that I was skeptical when I started hearing about this Razor Pages thing, as some of you may be. And I just want to let you know that, I came into this as like, what am I giving up? Is this a simpler, is this a dumbed down thing? I already saw, who here used, what was it called before, ASP.NET Web Pages? Yeah, so, and there were some nice things with those, but they kind of, every time I got to something difficult, I felt like I was missing out, and I had to run back to MVC. And there was no real, they call it a grow-up story. There was no clean way to take my ASP.NET Web Pages stuff and turn it into MVC. So, the nice thing with Razor Pages, let me explain what it is. So it's a page-focused approach. So opposed to MVC, where you've got models, views, controllers, you've got a bunch of, it's kind of a code-focused, and I don't know what focused, it's a pattern-focused approach. So Razor Pages is more of a page-focused approach, but it's built on top of MVC, and I'm going to keep coming back to this. So if you know MVC, if you know the primitives, if you write action filters, if you're mixing it up in the routing and all that stuff, like that stuff is all still there, and you have complete access to it. It's definitely not just a lightweight, like PHP, classic ASP kind of thing. When I talk to people, a lot of the time, that's the first kind of thing is they'll say, oh, this is just a dumbed down ASP.NET Core, got it. And that's not really what it is. In fact, the more I played with it, the more I started using it in production websites, I realized that it's actually more powerful in some scenarios. So it's not just for your simple scenarios. In fact, we taught a full-day workshop. I've done the same workshop as a 2-day workshop before, building out an entire conference planner with admin and all kinds of stuff, and it was all built using ASP.NET Razor Pages and ASP.NET Core Razor Pages, and it was not a stretch to do that. There was no place where we hit a wall and say, man, I wish this was MVC. And it does all the way through have customizable conventions. So as I said, it really is all MVC. It's built on top of all these things. So, your models, your controllers, all the kind of guts. If you've ever like really plumbed down or debugged MVC to see all the stuff that's in there, there are a million different ways to customize and change the way MVC works. And that's actually how they built ASP.NET Core Razor Pages, is on top of that stuff. So if you actually look, if you go out into the repo on GitHub, you'll see this is an example inside. You'll notice the namespace is ASP.NET Core MVC Razor Pages. And in this page base, you'll see all these, the namespaces we're pulling in are all MVC. And as you kind of go through and look at all this stuff, if I search through the repo, I'll find things like action invokers and, all that kind of stuff. So it really is truly built on top of MVC. So I don't know if that's comforting to some of you, but it was comforting to me as I kind of got started on it. Also, as I said, everything is customizable. So the things I'm going to be showing you today, the demos and things I'll show you, will be, using some pretty common sense conventions. Routing assumes, you're routing to a page based on the file name and that kind of thing. if you don't like that, if you want to get in and change things, you can change just about everything. So this is an example, it'll be in the slides, but it's an example of something where you can go in and deeply change how routing works and how page names are generated and stuff. So anything in there, as you see conventions that I show you, realize that those are just conventions and can all be modified. So great, I've made all these kind of excuses and don't worries and all that, but what really is the point of building Razor pages? So, some of the thing is, as you look at an MVC application, here's just an example, file new MVC application. I've taught courses before, and I say, okay, great, let's get started. People are like, okay, where do I write the code? Where's my HTML? How do I get to it? Well, okay. So the deal is, when you go to the site, you're actually there's this thing called routing. So we got to understand routing, and then the routing is going to take me over to this home controller, and then this home controller has this method here that all it's saying is return view. So what is even that method doing? Well, sometimes you need it. Okay, fine. So then we'll go over here, and by convention, we're going to look for a view, and it's going to be named home, and then we're over here, and there's this home. And then here it is, finally, here we get to this, right? And it kind of carries on through the whole way through. As you want to do things with MVC, you end up saying, all right, I would like to return a list of products. Great. I'm going to go create a model, and then I'll drop it in here. And then I'm going to create a controller, and I'll drop that in here. And then I'll create some views for it. Maybe I'll scaffold it, but there's still all those files there. And then somebody who knows MVC better than me will look over my shoulder and say, are you really going to return those models directly to the view? Nah, you shouldn't do that. You need a view model. I say, okay, all right, I do that and I refactor my code. And then someone else even smarter than me, probably Steve Smith, is going to come over and say, aren't you using feature folders? Because you really want to group them not by, and so I feel like there's a good amount of kind of ceremony and moving things around to actually get some quality code out there. So what if we can get the same quality or better code out and not have to kind of juggle all these files all over? So I like to think of Razor pages as less foot shooty. It's a little bit less easy to do something bad. An example of this is things like overbinding, and that was a problem all through early versions of MVC, where you could actually model bind to a model that had things you didn't expose in your view. Say you had a user model, and the user model had an isAdmin Boolean, and you didn't put it in your form, but your user maybe saw the code out on GitHub or just made a guess and did question mark isAdmin equals true in the URL. If you weren't guarding against that, you could make a mistake, and all of a sudden you've made that person an admin. There's a lot of examples like that where we saw people just kind of making mistakes on things, and there's a lot of kind of like, oops, you got to remember to do this, and so Razor Pages kind of simplifies some of those things over with some conventions. So less foot shooty. It's actually more powerful in some ways. So in my previous job, my boss didn't, before this I worked in a different group, it wasn't a .NET group. And my boss was technical, but he wasn't a ASP.NET dev. And he said, I would like to get up to speed on MVC. And so he said, I'm going to build the simple canonical developer, what everyone builds. I'm going to do a master details, right? Who here has done master details in ASP.NET MVC? It's a pain in the neck, right? It's a lot more like, wait a minute, this should be easy. I was doing this in web forms 12 years ago, and I dragged and dropped and went to lunch. It's actually kind of a pain because you've got a controller is really built around returning a single model, and then you have to build these composite models and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see towards the end, we'll see some examples where we can actually we can be more powerful without having to write all this extra code with things like composite models. So, summarizing the things that I've heard the product team say is really this is a more straightforward way. It's not a simpler, it's not a dumbed down, it's a more straightforward way to build web applications. That's important there, the word web application. So if you are building a site that's, users are interacting with HTML, they're clicking through it on the browser, they're getting back, forms, they're interacting in a browser, that's a web application, and that's what this was designed for. So if you are building an API, a backend for an Angular app or whatever, that's something where you would want to use still an MVC or an API controller. And actually, we've moved. We just have one kind of controller now in ASP.NET Core, right? And a controller is both an MVC and an API controller. So if you were building primarily a web application, that's what this is designed for. And MVC, of course, I have to do all the disclaimers. MVC is, of course, being still supported because this is all built on top of it. MVC is also a good solution in some cases. There are things where, I'll show you later, I'm building a website where I have MVC and Razor Pages together. In some cases, the MVC controller works better, right? But this is designed, we kind of recommend for, if you are building a web application, we recommend you try, or that the best, we recommend Razor Pages, all right? So we're going to start with hello world, and we'll do, we'll start from scratch. Let's close down our MVC site. All right. So I'm going to create a new application. You'll see on this, when I create an app, I've got some different options, right? So I actually, by default, we're going to select for you web application. That's the one we're pushing you towards, right? Of course, MVC is still here. And then we've also got some others that you've seen in some other talks here, like Angular, React.js, and those are actually built with both. Those have pages on the front end, and they also have controllers that are serving APIs to your back-end Angular stuff. Okay? So I'm going to create this. Well, that's spinning up. Any questions already off the bat? Nope. All right, you had your chance. All right, so let's take a look here. We've got a simpler folder structure. So this is it. We've actually, if I dig in here and look at my pages, I've got a few, but let me show you what they do. Actually, let me run this first. So. Cool. All right, so this is what it looks like, right? And if we look at, we'll see some of this text here that'll say things like application uses and how to and all that. So let's go find that. That is actually, I'll cut to the chase, that's in our index page. All right. Now, we don't have the things like the header in there, and that's because that is in the layout. That's, if you're used to MVC, or even going back a ways in web forms, that's how it's been kind of set up, right? So none of that changes. We've still got the same Razor. We've got still the same layout. So, and then we have things like view start, view imports. Let's go back to this index, and I'm actually going to cut all of that out. And let's just do something simple, like let's write a message. So let's go to the back end for this first. So here's a key difference, or a key thing already to pay attention to. We've got this little arrow here that means nested file, an associated file, right? So we've got index.cshtml, and we've got index.cshtml.cs. If you've done web forms before, you may be a little worried, like, oh no, is that code behind it? And it really is, it's different. It's more of an associated file. And the way that this works is the page is told where the view is, or excuse me, the page is told where its index model or where its page model is. But the index model knows nothing about the front end. The index model can in no way change the view. All it can do is set properties and expose things that the view can display, similar to MVC, right? So here I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a message. So we'll say, and in my onGet, I'll say message equals got to say that, right? All right, so what we're saying here is, as you might imagine with a get, we've got an on get. This maps to HTTP verbs. There's also going to be an on post. And we can also, there's async versions of these. We could say async on get or async on get async if we want to put the suffix in. So either supported. OK, so I've set a message there. So now I'm going to go to the front end and we'll model bind it. So I'll say at. So first of all, let me point out here, we've got a model already listed. Model is index model. Right? We've also got this magical directive at the top that says page. That's what makes this a page. If I don't have that there, it won't respond to any of the routing, anything. It won't be a page, right? So these two things are important. We've got the pages set and we've got the model set. These things here, this view data setting the title, that's actually going to be rendered out in the layout. So here where it says view data title, that's what that's for. So if I took that out of there, all that would do is we'd no longer have a title on the page. Okay. So now I'm going to say model dot message. That's it. So now let's run that. And I may switch over and do .NET Watch run at some point because I don't like stopping and starting. OK, so that's really tiny there. It does say hello Las Vegas, but it's really small. So let's go in and make that an H1. Cool. All right, so that's very simple. What if we also wanted to say something else or do something else? So I can just go in, and in my index, I can. Actually, I'm going to do that. I'm going to configure the .NET Watcher. And what that'll let me do is keep typing, changing the code. It'll watch for code changes and automatically recompile. So I'm going to include Microsoft .NET. I'm not sure if that's right. See if that restores. No, OK. Microsoft.NET Watcher, let me see. This will save us time. Microsoft.NET Watcher tools. I was so close. Awesome. So now, the reason I did that is because I can restore the tools, or restore the packages. So now that's there. And now I can go to the command line, and I can say, not that. Let me see. Heck with that. Let's go here. Awesome. So now I can say .NET watch run. So what's that's going to do, that the watcher is going to run my application. It's going to watch for any files changed, including any C# files, and it's going to recompile and rerun the app. So now I can just code away and Alt-Tab over and watch it go. So we're at port 53763. Awesome. OK. So now let's go in and add in another property. Let's just say public or whatever. Awesome. So we have the number 55, and let us go into our front end. And we'll just say It's important for a big site to have a page counter. Anyone remember those? So, cool. All right, so the idea there is we're going in, we're adding things to our page model, and then we're binding to them on the front end. So let me close out some of the things. And that's really the flow. I go in, I've got my page model, anything that's any properties there are exposed, any logic I need to do can go into this onGet. So as far as getting started, it's a pretty simple, lightweight scenario. I'm not digging around anywhere. Anything I want to put on the page is right there. Let's go deeper. So let's take a look at now. We just looked at the basic built-in one. I'm going to go in and create some new ones, right? So I'll go in under my pages. And remember, that's the magic thing. Anything that's under pages can be a Razor page. So I'll go, and that's a convention. You can override it. So we lost it. That's not cool. All right. Thank you for telling me. Might have been, okay. I'll try and just unplug and replug. That usually works, right? There it is. Okay. So we are going to create a new folder, which I called new folder. That's not cool. Let's call this monkey. And inside the monkey folder, we will add a new page. And this is just going to be a basic one, and we'll call this one Vegas. It actually takes, they're speeding this up, but it takes a while because it's just dumping two files on, a CS.html and a CS behind it. But it's hooked into this scaffolding thing that we'll look at in a bit, right? So, okay, so if I go into this, here's my Vegas, and if I just, say, whatever, right? And now go on this to Vegas. That's still recompiling. Monkey, thank you. That was the whole point, was I wanted to show you that it's folder-based, right? Awesome. Thanks for the correction there. So the idea is if you want to create an admin section of your site or whatever it is, you can go in and just group your pages right in there. The other nice thing is that these are all relatively referenced, meaning if I have a whole folder and they're all linking to each other, they just link by name. And so if I take that whole folder and drop it into another folder or even into another application possibly, like those pages all will still find each other. The routing still works, right? So now let us go further and let us actually, where are we at? We are into, I believe, model binding. So, cool. CRUD and scaffolding. So what we're going to do is start by creating a model. So that doesn't change in this case. This is my back-end model that I'm working around. And let me explain that in a second. So I'll add a class. This is my favorite Visual Studio feature. You don't have to type .cs at the end. People in my workshop learned that. Now you've learned that as well. So I can just create a movie. No CS. It's still going to work. Magic. Okay, so this is a model, and you think of these models as these are my data model. This is not something I'm going to be returning to the front end. And what's cool with this is with MVC, that separation wasn't really enforced. In fact, it kind of pushed you to return those models directly. This way, there's no real way you're exposing this. Instead, you're going in and adding it as part of a page model. Right? So for my movie, I'll do, we'll just do kind of a standard int ID. We'll do a prop string name or title. And we'll give it a prop decimal. I'm partly doing this as movies because there's a more full-featured tutorial out on the doc site. I'll point you to that at the end. And so I just kind of felt like no need to reinvent the wheel on that. So, all right, so we're going to scaffold that now. So I'm going to do add razor page. This time around, I'm going to say using entity framework CRUD create, read, update, delete. So movie. And then I'm going to create a new context. This has actually come a long way over time. This has gotten to, it used to have to hand wire this all yourself, and the scaffolding recently actually will do all this for you. So that is, actually I do want to put this in a subfolder, so I'm going to create a add folder. I gotta do that again. Cool. All right, so that is creating an entity framework context. It is adding it to the startup, so it's actually going to be registered for dependency injection, and it's setting it up with a default local login. Or is it? Let's see if I do a, it might be, sometimes this watcher gets a little confused because it's trying to build at the same time and, okay. We'll give this one more shot, and if it doesn't work, I'll jump to one that's done. We'll just call it Web Application 35 because that was it. So it was trying to build the project in order to understand the code, and it couldn't build it because there's already the watcher was building it in the background. So that's something you won't normally run into. I do like that watcher, though, because it saves me all the stop, build, all that stuff. Okay. So first of all, let's take a look at what it did in my startup. So down here, it's actually created, a DB context, and it's registered it with SQL Server. And then if I look, and that's it there. Then if I go into my movie, it's done. Not surprisingly, it's created 4 pages or 5 pages. So an index, create, read, update, delete. So let's run it, and then we'll go and take a look at how those work. After we fix the build errors, movie's a namespace, okay. See where it failed. That might not have been wise of me. Yeah, that was poor. I'm actually, I'll just, whatever. I'll create a new one called movies and redo it. Actually, I'm going to skip ahead just a tiny bit because I want to get this going. So here we go. So this is my movies. I called it before, so I didn't get that conflict, right? So let's take a look. First of all, if I go into the, this is what's in the index. So let me run it, and then we'll see how it works. If you're used to Razor, this is going to be the same standard kind of thing. And so we'll go pretty quickly through that. So this is your standard, go in, create a film, got a few. Right, so I can add them to the list. Cool. So let's look how those are set up. The Razor itself is going to be pretty, there's not going to be any big surprises on that. I think I have the watcher set up on this one too. Cool. All right, so I can .NET Watch run that one. So when you open the CS project, it opens it in a temporary directory, and I always do that. Yeah, this is the right one. So, okay, good. Well, let's get out of this one. Cool. All right, so when we look, first of all, at our index, what we're going to see is standard Razor model binding. As things are added, we're doing a message at the top saying that it's been added. There is a create new. Here's something that may be new to some of you. Is this is a tag helper. So you'll see anything that's purple in Razor inside an ASP.NET Core application is a tag helper. What that means is this is actually going to be evaluating code on the server and changing this markup before it's written out. So in this case, it's going to change this here where it says create new. That link goes to /movies/create. In here, it just said ASP page equals create. So what that's doing is it's figuring out the routing for us. Cool. After that, it's looping through. So it's writing out the names of the different model fields, and then it's just looping through and writing them out. So it's using the display for HTML helper so that it can format it with any display attributes we've set up on it. And then at the end, you'll see again, we've got ASP page, and we also have an ASP route ID. So the idea here is, as I go in and I want to edit one of these, let's see if I can zoom that. I don't think that's going to work well enough. As I mouse over these, take my word for it, the link is movies/edit $ID equals 1. And here it says movies details/1. So why is that? Well, I changed something, and I'll explain that in a second. But so the main things that we've looked at there is some newish things. ASP page. Again, like I said, these are relative links. So it's linking, and I could rename this folder, I could move this folder, and it would all still work. And then ASP route ID is just for passing the ID over. So let's look at the code behind on this. All right, so we have used dependency injection. We have injected our context. Actually, we haven't. The scaffolder did, right? Thank you, scaffolder. So it's just using dependency injection to pass that in. Then it's got a message here, and I think I may have added that one. The main thing is we've got an ilist of movie. And in the onGet async, remember I told you there's these async methods, and you really do want to be using async for database calls to free up your resources for other threads, so to handle other requests while your database call is being processed. So then here we're just saying movie equals blah, blah, blah. We're getting an async list. We're populating it into this property, and then that property is being bound in here. So we're just for eaching over them. So that's really kind of the model to it. Notice again, there's some other things in here that we've got listed. We've got things like a message. We have a show message, and I added that one in. I can show that in a second. Oops. Is it running still? 3.2. That's the wrong one. Cool. All right, and that's definitely the wrong one. 5.2.5.3.2. I've been thinking I want to make some sort of thing that instead of ports, like maps them to numbers I'll actually remember, or some sort of, there's got to be some smarter way there. So, okay, so as we go in, let's create one and delete it. Actually, let's look at the create, what's happening on the create. So here I go through, I click create. So let's look at the create Razor. So here we've got a form. We haven't looked at forms before, but kind of obvious what that's doing. The form has your standard ASP validation summary, label 4. The reason we're using label 4 there, the reason the scaffolder did that is because if we put any attributes on the model, for instance, on this one I put in display name instead of title, we called it film title. So it can go in and display it with that. So here it says film title instead of just title. All right. So that's that. If we, and then we're going to notice down at the bottom, we just have a submit. We're just submitting the form. So there's nothing special we have to do on that. Then let's look at the code behind on that. So here's the deal where, try and guess where this is going. Is it going to be in an onGet method? Nope. Is it going to be in an onGetAsync method? Nope. Well, so those methods will exist to show the form the first time, right? So we return page, which by the way, that's the method. You just want to, like you would do return view, this is return page. This will return the unpopulated form. But to actually process it, that's going to be in an onPostAsync method. Okay? So this code is binding because of this bind property attribute. So bind property turns on model binding for this. It says, if I'm posted something that looks like a movie, bind it to this property. So then we can just say, if it's invalid, if it didn't pass validation, for instance, if I go, I don't know, submit an empty form. Price field's required because it's numeric, right? So I think I actually can create one without a name, but let's not do that. Cool. All right, so if it passes validation, then all we do is the standard EF stuff. Notice again that redirect to page, it's /index. So /index says stay relative to the movies folder and go back over to the index view and show the item added to the list. So the one other one I want to show you, which is kind of interesting, is delete. And the reason delete is interesting is because when I go in and click delete, I've actually I've modified this to show a message. So here I'm going to click delete, and it says at the top, deleted Magnificent 7. Okay? That wasn't built in to start with. I actually used temp data on that. So temp data is a way to show a message one time, but if I refresh it, that message goes away. So if I keep refreshing or if I come back to this page, I should only see that message one time. So that's what temp data is for. It's after a post, show a message saying that something happened, and then the message goes away. So it's pretty easy how that's set up. Inside the delete, so here I've got the delete has this confirmation. It says, are you sure you want to delete it? And it binds to the model that was passed in. Then if we look over, sure, why not? If we look over on the delete, it's got a message with a temp data attribute on it. Okay? So what's neat is, if I have a matching temp data message in two different pages, I can post from one to the other, and the other one will show that message. So in this case, I went in and I said, or the delete goes in, it says, okay, if there's a movie, if you have an ID, if you can find the movie, then go and delete it. So movies.blah-blah-blah.single.delete. Okay, so that's the, that's the onGet. This is the delete here. So it's going to do the remove. So here's where I went in and said deleted. So I set that message. Okay, so I've set it with a message property with a temp data attribute. Remember I said it has to match on both of them, because I'm not going to show that message on this page. I'm going to show it on the index. So now we'll pop back over to the index. We've got a message with temp data property, and that is in the index right up at the top. And I added some bootstrap on there. Okay. One other thing was, when I first built this, that thing showed at the top all the time. It showed up even if I didn't have a message to show. And I really wanted to toggle it, so only show that alert area if there is not a message, right? So it looked like, just to make it obvious what was going on, it looked like that, right? So we don't want to show this div unless we've got a message. So this is an example of where, you know, the power of having a page model makes it really easy to toggle things on and off. If you've worked with an MVVM framework before, this is really more of that kind of feel, right? So I go into my index, and I created a property, and this property just says, it's a bool, and it just says show message, and that bool is it's set to true if there's a message, false if it's just null or white space. So that is my entire show message property. And then that's all I need to do in order to toggle that on and off in the index, as I just put this conditional there. Does that make sense? I'm kind of running through a lot of things. I think there's a lot of small, little important points here. I intentionally wanted to show you the code that's generated from scaffolding, because this is something you can run through and do yourself in 5 minutes. You know, this is something that's not a bunch of crazy code, and I really feel like being able to read this code that's there, that's been reviewed by people, that's pretty good quality code, this is a good way to kind of get started understanding what Razor Pages does. And you'll see a lot of those things, it's kind of these standard you know, patterns. You'll see ASP page to create a link. You'll see down at the bottom for this one, you'll see this ASP page for creating links, and then route handlers. There's one other thing I wanted to point out. If you'll remember, the details view had a slightly different URL. So if I go in, recreate Blade Runner, we're doing Blade Runner remakes. So if I click on details, the URL for that doesn't have a query string. And the reason for that is I actually modified the route for this page. So if we go into the details page and look at the top, I created this right here. This is a route constraint, and I put it on the page attribute. Totally not required, but if you do want to change, I could make it an optional. You know, I can do all kinds of things as far as what I'm going to bind to. I can take something with combine several different attributes and map them to a route. And as soon as a matching route exists, that's what's going to take precedence. So because when I go back to the list and I click on edit, that one, there's no route constraint that says how I want it to be set up, so it's just going to go to edit $ID equals 2. All right? So that's kind of the look at that. I do have time. I want to show you one other fun thing, just as I started going through and playing with it and thinking about, like, okay, how would we wire these parts together? So I don't know if you did the same, but way back when I was learning web forms, one of the common samples was, let's put a button, and every time you click the button, it's going to count. It's going to count by 1, right? So there's similarities, but there's important differences here, too, and I think that's actually kind of cool to see. If we go on to the, let's get out of the movies folder, let's close everything. I don't think I want to change. Okay. Cool. So now we'll go into the index. So here I've put in a button at the bottom. And I've also got in the back, I've got a count. I've got this count, and I actually hook the count up to temp data because I want it to persist between clicks. And of course, I could have hooked this up to some static thing or some database back thing or whatever, but I just wanted to take a look at, like, how am I going to count up without doing any of that? And temp data will persist something for 1 click, 1 post back. So then I originally, when I come to the page, I'm just going to see this on get method. When I click the button, that button is hooked up using an ASP page handler. So the ASP page handler says which method, so we saw ASP page using that on an A tag to point to another page. This one, ASP page handler, says, I want a handler for this specific thing on this same page. So I said, I want you to point to button click. So now if we go back and look at this, we have an onGet button click. So onGet is the convention-based thing for what happens for a GET request. Button click is what I told it my handler name is. When I click on that button click, I increment the count by 1. So I just do count plus equals 1. And I'm using temp data to back that up. And then on the out here, then to show what I've got, I just do model.count. So if we go in here and go back to the index, I don't know if you've gotten hooked on any of these clicker games, but I sometimes do. So, and it says to keep clicking. Anyhow, I thought that was kind of useful to kind of think about how these are wired together, how you are hooking. This is not linking to another page. This is linking to another handler on the same page. And I can have as many of these as I want. So now we've gone through kind of the mechanics. We've gone into, let's see if the screen goes away. Nope. OK, we did the click game. Awesome. I showed you customizing routing. I want to show you some more advanced details. And this was stuff where I kind of started to come around to, OK, it's not just a simple dumbed down MVC. This is actually something where I can start using some MVVM skills I had from a while ago. I can start getting around some of these things that have been frustrating to me in other scenarios. So I have here let's close this. Let's stop that. Anyone have people used that .NET Watcher before? That's really handy for me. I like doing that, especially as I'm changing a lot of code to see things update on the fly. So I'm going to be opening my order details page. So it all kind of comes back to that boss, and he really wanted to see an order details page. And there it is. So here's an example where I created I've got here's my model. So I've got orders. Orders are made up of multiple products. But the problem is I don't just have one order and a list of products because I have to know how many of each product. So I may order 3 things of ramen and 14 things of gummy bears, and I need to keep that all together. So I'm using an order, actually I'm using a list inside of this. It's kind of cool, I think. No. So I actually had a slick way of doing it. It is it's what's returned by the order service. So actually, these are really straightforward. My order is just information about the order, who ordered it, when they ordered it. My product is name and price of the product. I've got an order service, and the order service actually is this is kind of like it's basically taking the place of Entity Framework. It's just making a bunch of, creating orders for me. So now let's look at the page I used to display that. So I guess I should run it first. So this is an example in the past where I would have been working against the pattern a bit to do this with MVC, because I would have needed to, go in and put a lot of different things together. I would have needed to. So here I've got on one page, I've got my customer details at the top. I've got shipping status. I couldn't resist the bootstrapping, so I bootstrapped that up. And I've got my order details at the bottom, and I've actually got quantity, unit price, and subtotals, and I've got the actual total for the order, right? So you can imagine this building out a dashboard, a bug tracker thing where you've got multiple things, one project has multiple bugs, all that kind of stuff. So that's one of those things where I've actually gotten frustrated in the past with MVC, because I end up creating these complicated data transfer objects, and then I've got view models, and then I've got to do all this stuff to put logic behind them, because the models really don't have logic. So let's take a look at how that's set up here. So if I go into my index page, I'm going to look in the code behind on this. All right. So we have this stuff to bind to. So I've got my order at the top. I've got a list. I actually was kind of like agonizing over what's the coolest way, what's not the coolest way, what's the most C#7 way of representing order details? And fortunately, I ran into Mads Torgerson last night, and he's like, oh, I just do a tuple and a list of tuples. So I've got a list of tuples. I've got product and int quantity. So that's my order details. Then I've got a message with information about the shipping status. I've got a shipping percent to show for that chart that shows how, where it's at. And I've got a total. So that is all my front end to this needs to know. That's all my Razor needs to know. Then how do I get that information? Well, I've got an on-get. So first of all, I'm dependency injecting in the order service. In my on-get, I'm calling into that service, and I'm just saying, supply me all this stuff. So instead of having to have one big composite model, I'm able to say, go get me an order, go get me order details. This could be things that they're not even related, right? So I'm able to pull all those things in separately. And then on the front end, I'm able to just go through and bind to them pretty straightforward. So up at the top, I'm showing the order information. So I just bind to model order. Farther down in here, as I'm showing shipping status, so then I'm binding to, well, that one's a lot of bootstrap. Let's skip over that. But it's the same sort of thing. Here I want to show the order details. So I just iterate through model.order_details. So I'm not really kind of having to worry about digging in and out of things. If I wanted to show messages or update status or all that kind of stuff, just drop a new property on, right? So this is an example of a place where I really kind of feel like this can be more powerful and more straightforward. Obviously, as something like this grows, it could be, I need to keep my code organized. I would want to refactor and abstract things to other services and things. But actually, this is the entire code of my on-get. Like, that's it, right? So while this could be refactored and could be componentized, that kind of thing, it's not something I'm ashamed of. This is just a few lines of code. So that's that. I don't know what else we have in here. Yeah. And of course, I could also be doing things like setting some properties, like if delivered, then don't show the shipping status or that kind of stuff. Right? So that's order details. I just want to, I don't have time to dig into it, but who here was at our class on Monday? Several people, cool. So we did a class on Monday, GitHub presentations, ASP.NET Core App Workshop. And the idea with this was we built out a multi-tier application. So we had a back-end API, we had a front-end API, we had JavaScript services on the front end that I kind of showed how that could work. And then we actually had you log in and personalize it, and you end up with a personalized agenda. So I think we have some pictures, and we don't in that one. So you actually can go in and personalize your agenda and build out your website. Let's see if we have one in here. I guess you have to take my word for it. But it's a pretty full-featured application. This is one where I'll have a link to the code in the notes here. And I recommend this as an example if you want to dig deeper into things like authorization on pages. And then one other thing I wanted to kind of show off that I've been having fun with and learning more about Razor Pages in the real world on lately is .NET Foundation website. So my day job, I work on the .NET team, but where I spend most of my time is on the .NET Foundation. So I work on the .NET Foundation, and for people that don't know, the idea is that .NET Foundation actually holds the copyright for all the .NET code. So we've got engineers at Microsoft. We also have engineers at Samsung, Google, across the world, community, all the people that Scott Hanselman showed, and all those circles on the map. every time they commit code, they're actually signing a contributor agreement. They do it one time and then they're done. And that code is copyright.net Foundation. So the cool thing is the code is out there forever. Like Scott talked about how we kind of open source stuff in the past. This is out there. It's not under Microsoft control, right? Which I kind of like. So here's the .NET Foundation website. Some things that we did on here. Well, first of all, if I go in and look at stop this. This is an example of where I used MVC and Razor Pages together, and it worked just great for me. So part of this was for some things where, for instance, I reused some code from another site where it was showing lists of events, and I said, it was a controller, and I said, great, I can reuse that controller. There were some other things where I just felt more used to, used to certain things, and so I said, hey, I'm going to do this with MVC. That's just what I want to do today. So that was no problem. I went in, I had the same layout, I went in, this is my MVC. When I wanted to create pages, here's all my pages. And this was especially compelling. The no-brainer one on this is when I've got to do some simple things like just, create something that's 90% just CSHTML, or just Razor, right? It's just basically going to turn into HTML. So those are the obvious ones. As I've continued to learn more pages, I'm doing kind of pretty much most of the new development is all going to be pages. But it's nice to have that flexibility and not feel like I'm stuck with one. I also wanted to show one other neat thing that's just a Razor feature, but is really helpful with Razor Pages. As we're continuing to work, the markup is getting bigger and bigger and more complex. And sometimes you have code like that you'd actually like to reuse throughout the site. So you can do things like create a partial, but you still have to have the controller needs to know to populate the partial, and you end up with some things there. So I'm actually using view components on those. Is anyone here using view components? I'm looking for one hand. Yes, cool, all right. So I really like view components. And the idea with view components, we take a look here. These things here, these news and events. So these are populated into a backend service. They go into a cache. But I want to be able to show things like this elsewhere on the site. So for instance, here we've got recent posts. We've got recent posts also showing here. So how can we kind of componentize that, both to clean up my markup and also to allow me to reuse it on other pages? So the way I did that is using a view component. And my view components here, let me look, view components. So if we look at the news view component, a view component has a backend that looks like this. It's all C#. It's just populating something. The front end, if we look in views, shared components. So here it is under components. If I go to like news, then this is going to be passed a model. So this actually has a similar kind of feel to pages. And then it's going to go and bind to it. What's nice with this is it is totally self-contained. So the only two files that need to exist are the front end Razor and then that back end. And I kind of went through this pretty quick. Let's see if there's anything else more interesting in here. I've got dependency injection in order to populate it. I've got the one other thing about this is a view component, instead of returning things the way Razor would, where you just set properties and the front end binds to it, the way you do this here is you're given an invoke async and you return a view. So you return this iView component result. So that's the one thing that's different is a view component, the front end is going to expect to get a IEnumerable of some sort of, well, it's getting a view component result. In this case, it's enumerable news items, and it just iterates through. So I feel like that's a good way to kind of clean up as your Razor pages get more complex. I'm really enjoying using view components for those. Some things that the team's looking at in the future, continuing to build out some more components. You can see some of the things here. A lot of it is just based on usage, what we're seeing people run into and questions as you hit them. Here are some references. I've got, I was talking to Jeff Fritz the other day. We thought QR codes are coming back. I think it's cool. So if you take a picture of this, this is actually just going to point you to a gist. I'm going to update the gist with more things like link to the slides. And so these are some of the things I'd recommend. There's a couple of docs here. The docs, I really am impressed with what the docs team is doing. So the Razor Pages high-level doc is a good thing at just explaining what are Razor Pages. If some of the things I said weren't clear, it goes through them in more detail. The one at the bottom there actually digs into the conventions more. And the one at the top, again, I probably should have labeled these, huh? The one at the top that says Razor Pages actually links to some tutorials, and there's some pretty in-depth tutorials about building like I mentioned earlier, this movie management site, and it actually digs into that. And then I linked to the ASP.NET Core App Workshop, and that's that workshop where we went through and built stuff with Razor Pages. So to wrap up, ASP.NET Razor Pages is MVC. It's completely built on MVC. You can customize whatever you'd like. Page Model's your friend. Read those docs, they're good. And again, like the kind of tagline I'm going with is it's ASP.NET Core Razor Pages is a more straightforward way to build your web applications with ASP.NET Core. Any questions? Yeah. And we're out of time, so if people want to walk out, totally cool. Yep.